Here, I'm gonna do my little vent. I don't know if it's an event. It's Steve Donahue has a podcast, and this one was about kind of drifted onto audiobooks, and just that him very much feeling that audiobooks aren't um, isn't isn't a reading. It is a mediated experience where the audiobook narrator is largely shaping your experience of the book, and that is significantly different than you um, sitting down and reading the book. And I guess he takes the example of someone who's taking the bus, listening to an audiobook. That is not reading, that is multitasking. Whereas I guess if you were somebody who was sitting on a bus reading a book, that wouldn't be multitasking, I suppose. Um, and just this idea that the audiobook narrator can um, can significantly change your experience of a book. And I mean, he does make the point, like if someone's a terrible reader, that can mess up even the greatest of writing. Um, though it's like I would say actually the standard, like I listen to a lot of books like Anthony Trollope on Gutenberg, where it's a lot of times it is people who are fairly amateur readers, but are quite passable. And actually sometimes I prefer them because they're not as dramatic in their reading, so it gives me a little bit more of a blank sheet for the thing, because I find that I'm not a dramatic reader to myself, I suppose. Um, it's just one of these interesting things of, I know that Steve Donahue is not a vocalizer. When I read to myself, I have to admit that I am vocalizing to myself internally. So because I'm vocalizing to myself internally, it's not too much of a jump to then jump to somebody who's vocalizing in my ear to me and be getting what I feel like is a fairly similar reading experience. Um, I think it can help me increase the pace of the intake of those words. Um, a lot of times I'm going back and back and back on things. I don't get that flow, that natural um, that natural flow that happens when I have a reader reading to me versus I have to read it myself. It's actually a lot more choppy. Actually, they're talking about kind of continuous, concentrated intake of the work, and that you get that better with reading. But I would actually argue that I probably get that better with um, audiobooks. Now that is not to say that I find that certain the more the more languagey, the more complex, the more knotted, the more difficult a work is. Probably I have to admit that's more times I would want to be reading the book, because then I would want to go slow and dwell on particular words and have a different experience than where if I'm more of it's more of the storytelling, which or the character interaction, which actually I find Anthony Trollope is really good for this. You know, Anthony Trollope great for this. Um, Probably some difficult litfic dude. Well, I guess you could call Anthony Trollope a difficult litfic dude. I don't know, David Foster Wallace or James Joyce. Maybe those would be difficult ones. Even though I've actually heard people sing the praises of just letting James Joyce words gush over you and not actually stress, because it releases you from having to stress about all the nuances. Though James Joyce obviously is all about the difficult nuances and wants you to take 5 years to read his book, to 20 years to read his book, because it took him 20 years to write it. Yeah, you know, of Ulysses is what I'm obviously thinking about here. Though God help us, it could also be um, um, the one after that, but hell, I haven't even got through Ulysses yet. So I'm Finnegan's Wake. So yeah, God help us. The audiobook of Finnegan's Wake must be a freaking nightmare. A gush of meaningless sounds. Uh, meaningless to me because I'm an ignoramus, and I'm not that part of that 2% of the reading population that's actually read and even understood 5% of the bloody work. But yeah, so I don't really have anything. I'm not going to definitively say that audiobooks not aren't always not reading, but there's enough period there that I'd say it's mostly reading for me, or at least the ones that I read. And indeed, yes, I will admit some books don't lend themselves as well to audiobooks, but the ones who do, I actually would argue do really well, and some of those books actually do better, are better as audiobooks. I think the works of Jim Butcher, a lot of kind of very late urban fantasy, is exactly the kind of candy that I want to consume as a listening thing, and that would be a complete waste of my time to sit down and read. Which but really they really work well as audiobooks. It really works well as an audiobook. I enjoy it. I enthused as it, Spike reading Dresden Files to me is just wonderful, and I would be loath to give that up. And I think it adds to my reading experience, and does not subvert it into something else entirely. Well, I guess it is something else entirely. This is always that dumb arguments that people have. They bring up it's good rage click baiting thing. I guess Steve succeeded. He got my rage thing going, even though I'm going to defeat him by dumping this on my private channel and filming it in the dark in my backyard as usual. So no one's ever going to have to listen to this. It was just me having my little vent. Ooh, now, thank you for reading my video on this. It was you can tell that these words were all finely crafted in very artistic, incomplete, hacky sentences. All right, more videos later, dumbass that I am.